It's Sniffers, yay! Okay, we're gonna get into another afternoon session and a couple of quick announcements. First of all, at the end of the day, please don't just immediately dash off. You'll find a little very nice surprise as you exit. So look around and you'll see something being handed to you, which is quite pleasant. End of the day, lanya. So that can stay a surprise. Second thing is, we can plan some shuttles to take people back to the hotel at like right after, so like at 5:15 or 5:30. Just curious, who would want to take a shuttle back to the hotel? So, show of hands, please. Okay, because we're not going to try to arrange people getting from like here to restaurants or whatever. That's on your own. So just curious. Okay, and I think without further ado, Mandy Brown.
Thank you. This a little closer. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay. So my name is Mandy Brown. I am the CEO and co-founder of, I will stay closer to the, thank you for that. Stay closer to the mic. Just shake your hands if I do that again. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Editorially. I'm also the co-founder of A Book Apart, which has been publishing books about web design for about 5 years now, the 10th book coming out in a couple of weeks. And I previously worked at Typekit, which is a font service that was acquired by Adobe and is now influencing Creative Cloud. And at Norton, the independent publishing house known for the Norton Critical Editions and Norton Anthology. So I have a lot of experience kind of across product and design and editorial. Editorially is a new collaborative writing and editing tool that I'm working on. And the first question that I usually get when I tell people what that I'm doing, that I'm building this new kind of collaborative writing and tool, is why on earth would you do something like that? Paul Ford, in fact, did a review in the MIT press recently. We talked about us and a number of other tools of Medium and Fargo, which is an outliner, Marquee, Ghost, Scrollkit. There's been a kind of preponderance of new tools around kind of composition and writing. And he asked, I think, an important question, which is why, when we have an abundance of tools for writing and editing, are we still looking at this problem? Are we still dedicating a lot of time and effort to thinking about how it is that we write and edit together? I have several answers to that question. The first is that writing is just really, really important. It's one of the most important things we do as human beings for each other and for people who come after us. Writing is a way of sharing information and knowledge and culture that extends past the boundaries of our own lives so that other people can learn from us. Neil Gaiman, writing in The Guardian recently, talking about libraries and the importance of libraries, also brought up I think a really salient point that language itself is a living thing that we are constantly evolving and changing and growing with, and so using it and kind of pushing the boundaries of that and thinking about how we work as writers and editors is a critical part of that. Writing, I don't think, is ever going to be a solved problem. The second answer to this question, I think, comes around to how we read now and the fact that we are constantly reading across any number of devices and platforms in lots of different contexts, various points of the day. We probably read more now than at any previous point in human history. And that translates into more writing and, critically, more good writing. When you have a million things to choose from when you're reading, it's only the really good stuff that you're going to spend your time on, which translates back into thinking about what is the writing process that gets the best possible writing. And finally, I think one of my other answers to this question comes down to what's going on with publishing on the web today. We've shifted in recent years from a kind of print-first publishing platform where the web was kind of the secondary to a web-first publishing system where we're publishing first to the web and maybe not to print at all, and thinking about what that means. And one of the things that I think emerges from that is the fact that a lot of what we've done as writers and editors and publishers in the print world continues to be relevant, maybe even hyper-relevant, as we take those strategies and skills to the web and think about how to translate them and adapt them to a different environment. So that particular process of taking values and methodologies from one field or one area of space and kind of adapting them to others is something that I have a kind of a personal attraction to. I spent a number of my formative years as an undergrad bouncing back and forth between physics and English departments, getting degrees in both, and ventured into publishing specifically because it was a space where you could exercise a very Catholic set of interests. I think a a lot of people who I speak to who go into publishing do it because they are interested and curious about a lot of different topics, many more hybrids in this field than specialists. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the other fields and areas that have informed the work that we're doing with Editorially and how we think about writing and editing on the web today. So the first of those is the editorial tradition, so things that we've learned over decades of publishing that are continuing to be relevant, and how we approach those skills and that history and publishing to the web. The second is the web standards movement, which has, I think, enabled the reading applications that we have now. The fact that we can read across thousands of different devices and platforms and shift reading from initial context into another context is in part because of the work that the web standards movement accomplished in the last decade. The third are remote workflows. So in many ways, the editorial process is kind of one of the traditional remote distributed teams with an editor or a publisher in New York and a writer somewhere other part of the world. And increasingly, I think that's how we're working. If you're not on a distributed team now, you probably will be. And thinking about that, how that affects our work as collaborators. And fourth, and critically given our location here today, I think is thinking about data stewardship. So how important it is as people who are making and sharing content to make sure that content has a really long life after we have gone, that we're leaving things behind and we're not losing important parts of our culture. So let me talk about the editorial tradition first. I think there are a lot of there's a lot of history around what it means to edit a text and evolve that text over time. We have to think about what happens when you bring that into the medium that is the web. So we've adapted the traditional editorial workflow, thinking about like cutting up paper and physically cutting and pasting, to a system on the web that takes some of its cues from collaborative software development. So we have a version control tool. So as you work in Editorially, you can save versions. And then those versions persist and are put together into a chronology that you can revisit at any time. So you can go back, look at past versions, you can revert to past versions. All of the history becomes preserved. These kind of milestones in the process of working either by yourself or critically with other people, those states become preserved. And once you have a version system, it becomes trivial to actually compare versions and let you see what's happening. So really a kind of flexible process for looking at the changes between texts as things have evolved, letting you dip in and out of the text to kind of see small things that have changed or big things that have changed at different points across the history of the text. The next influence, the core influence for us is the web standards movement, which I have a lot of closeness to given my work on A List Apart and A Book Apart. Possibly hundreds of different kinds of devices in this room, tens of thousands of different kinds of devices out in the world that people could be using. That kind of depends upon the web standards movement and the work that was done in the early part of the century. So it's entirely possible now that when you look at something on the web that you could read it in a very composed, very beautiful, very styled environment. This is the Great Discontent. It's an interview site. It does beautiful layout work. And you might look at this on your glossy 48-inch monitor. Or you might shift it and read it in Instapaper at some other point in time when all of the styles have been completely stripped out. And this is the reality of publishing on the web today, that the core content itself is going to look different to different users and different devices at different times. And you have to author it in such a way that it is prepared for that journey. The only way to do that is to really think hard about the underlying markup. I think critically that markup is actually part of the job of the writer and editor. A lot of WYSIWYG tools have tried to obfuscate that work or say that it is the job of somebody else in the team. I think if you're thinking hard about what the text means and how it's going to go out into the world, that the people who are closest to the words, the writers and the editors, are the ones who need to be involved with that. And that means authoring as close to the medium in which it's going to be published, in this case HTML, as possible. HTML's a lovely publishing environment. It's kind of awkward as an authoring environment. So we adopted Markdown, which is a shorthand, lets you do things like use asterisks for bulleted lists and emphasis, kind of paving some of the cow paths of the way we write over email and in plain text environments, and letting us create an environment that allows you to author HTML really cleanly and easily, so that you know when you're done writing something like this that it can be sent to Instapaper and it's going to work. The third tradition that we're borrowing from are remote workflows. My team at Editorially is, I think, a good example of this. We have 3 people based in Brooklyn, 1 each in Boston, Austin, Boulder, Portland, and San Francisco, and fully expect that as we add more people, we will be bringing on more cities, more oceans, maybe even more countries to that list. This is the nature of working on a team, whether you're doing software development or publishing today. Increasingly, we're in different parts of the world. We're commuting across spans of time and distance. There's, I think, a myth around how remote teams work that's important to, that I want to dispel, which is that communication needs to be really efficient or really brief in order to work when you have a distributed team. You're not spending as much time face-to-face, you're not bumping into each other in the hallways, therefore all of your engagement needs to be super efficient. I actually don't think that that's true. I think that one of the things that happens when a remote team get together is that team benefits from a certain kind of redundancy of communication that allows them to engage with one another, really hear what the other person is saying and understand, kind of listen, develop the kind of cues that you might see if you were in a room with someone that you don't have access to when you're communicating through text in different parts of the world at different times. So how do we do this editorially? The first thing we do is offer a kind of think that the document is in that state. This borrows a little bit from commit messages in software development, which kind of leave a trail behind the work. So you can go back and kind of look at what happened, see how something evolved, understand the context for which changes are made. The second part is you can leave notes and discussions around individual pieces of text. So focusing not only, instead of in the entire version or on like the process, but looking at the language itself and exploring the discussions that can happen there. And all of this stuff is preserved and made available to every person who participates in the document and comes along later. So you can close a discussion after you've replied to it, but it remains available for everyone to catch up on and reopen it or contribute to it later. So the door to discussion is always open. And finally, there's a third place where you can communicate, which we have activity feeds that capture all of the different activity that goes on in a particular document, and also have another place for communication to talk about workflow or kind of high-level feedback that doesn't fit into a text or into a version note. So there's a lot of potential kind of overlap, different places where you could leave the same kind of information. But I think that overlap, that redundancy is actually really critical to remote teams understanding each other and engaging effectively. And the fourth, data stewardship. So we're kind of crunching on the bones of GeoCities as we walk around this building. I think that it would be foolish of me to start a company or to stand in this room and not acknowledge the fact that a lot of people have come before us and a lot of data has been lost. So I think that's something that we take really, really seriously, both for our current users and thinking long-term. We want to build things that have really strong long-term cultural value, and that means you have to think about where it's going to go when you're not there to take care of it anymore. I worked with a handful of people at Contents Magazine to put together a kind of special report around data preservation, and we came up with 3 kind of broad principles for startups and other organizations who are working in this space to adhere to. First is treat data like it matters. Second is no upload without download, and the third is to support data rescue. So we take all 3 of these extremely importantly in terms of the way that we develop editorially. We have multiple redundant storage systems so that if something goes wrong, we have a copy to restore work. We have both the version control system and an autosave in the application itself, so there are multiple ways for the work to be saved as it's in progress. Our very first prototype had an export feature. It was one of the first things that we built, and we continue to iterate and provide more formats and opportunities to export to get out of the system. And we've pledged that regardless of where we end up as a team, we will always make sure that our users have access to the work that they produced within Editorially. And that last point, I think, offers some other opportunities in terms of thinking about what happens to a text once it's done, once it's been completed, once the writing process is done.